All set? Thank you. So welcome everyone to tonight's school committee meeting. Tonight is Thursday, November 2nd, 2017, and the meeting tonight is being broadcast by Milford TV. If anyone would like a copy of the broadcast, please reach out to a member of the administration or the school committee. We have some special guests here tonight. The Milford High School Chamber Choir is here. So I'm going to hand it off to you, and you can go ahead and put on a show for us.
Great. All right. My name is Sarah Roby. I'm the director of choirs here at Milford High School. I'm also a music specialist at Brookside. This is our high school chamber choir. It's our most exclusive ensemble, auditioned ensemble. We are preparing for our concert next Wednesday. We have the vertical concert, grades 4 through 12. So this is the piece that we'll be singing at that concert. So it's called Fair Phyllis by a composer named John Farmer from the Renaissance time period. It's really fun. Enjoy.
Fair Phyllis I saw sitting all alone, feeding her flock near to the mountainside. Phyllis I saw sitting all alone, feeding her flock near to the mountainside. The shepherd knew not whither she was gone,
knew not whither she was gone.
But after her lover, all means was high.
Up and down, and down,
Up and down, 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 he wandered.
while she was
missing, when he found her. Oh, then they fell a-kissing, oh, then they fell a-kissing, oh, kissing, oh, then they fell a-kissing.
up and down, up and down,
Up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down,
while she was
missing, when he found her. Oh, then they fell a-kissing, oh, then they fell a-kissing, oh, kissing, oh, then they fell a-kissing.
That was beautiful.
Thank you so
job.
much
Great.
for having us.
Thank you for coming. Now, is this the group that sang at the Woodland opening as well?
Yes,
It is?
yeah,
Okay, they did a
last
great job then, too.
A lot of the
Nice
same
work.
places. We're lucky. Go ahead, John.
Thank you for coming.
Sure, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
That was great, guys.
I feel like Len Goodman dancing with the stars. Spectacular!
That was great.
All right. So our first order of business tonight is approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the October 19th, 2017 regular meeting and executive session? Motion from Scott, seconded by John. All in favor? Next order of business is announcements, correspondence, and distributions. Do we have any announcements tonight?
I'm sorry?
Any announcements or correspondence?
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Just want to recognize the Milford High School cheerleaders for coming in first and actually as also overall grand champion at their competition over this past weekend. Their coach continues to do an amazing job and again, continues to be a very talented group of students. Milford, for those who don't know, actually Milford High School actually competes in the co-ed division because we actually do have a co-ed cheerleading team, which is certainly a growing effort here within Milford. There's not nearly as many schools that do have that good fortune to have both, and every single one of those students is phenomenal athletes, so certainly congratulations to all of them.
Thanks, Scott. Any other announcements? Jen?
I'd like to thank the high school. Last night they offered a forum for parents of students of all ages on how to finance your child's college education. And I was able to attend, and looking around the audience, there were many parents who have younger students And it was great to have that outreach. It was Mifa who was there, who ran the presentation. All of the guidance counselors were there to offer additional support, and it was a great start for families who are thinking about how to undertake that rather large expense.
Is there anyone there from the Lottery Commission?
Yeah. They didn't identify themselves.
Any other announcements or correspondence? So I do have one. The Milford High School Athletic Hall of Fame Committee is proud to announce the recently elected class of 2017 Milford High School Athletic Hall of Fame. The 12 inductees are Frank Berry as coach administrator, Charles Bricado III, Jeffrey Charrington, Nicholas DeLague, Kevin Fair, Daniel Parenti Fallon, Stephen Foley, Robert Gilmore, Robert Lanzetta, Deborah Koch Mason, James Mazzucchelli, Trevor Walker, and in addition to those individuals, we're also going to be inducting 3 outstanding teams: the 1956 football team, the 1998 MIAA Division I boys state runner-up boys soccer team, and the 1999 MIAA state runner-up boys volleyball team. The Hall of Fame banquet will be held on Sunday, November 19th at 1 o'clock at the Milford Portuguese Club. If anyone is interested in attending or would like to purchase some tickets, they can contact Peter Boucher, the high school athletic director, or the committee chairman, Mr. Zacchelli, Nick Zacchelli.
Great.
Right.
Congratulations.
Kevin, do you have it?
So Joe, that was the 19th at 1 p.m.
19th at 1 o'clock. Yeah. All right. Next, we have invitation to speak. Is anyone here to address the board? Not seeing anyone. We have some students. Would you like please come up? We have Megan LaRocco and Amelia Bontempo. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for having us.
It's our pleasure.
I'm Megan, this is Amelia. We're both
Hello.
seniors at Milford High School, and last week we just finished up our last Spirit Week, pep rally, and harvest dance.
As seniors.
Yes, it all ran very smoothly. There was a lot of participation, which is always good to see, and it's one of the most fun weeks in the school year.
Yeah, it was really awesome to see all the school spirit. It's kind of funny going day to day. A lot of kids are grumpy. I don't want to be there, but when it's pep rally week, it's crazy. Everyone goes all out, which is always awesome. Milford High School Theater Workshop has a play a couple weeks. On Friday, November 17th at 7 p.m., they're going to be showing Alice in Wonderland, which we're all very excited to see. That on Friday, Saturday the 18th at 7 p.m., and then Sunday, November 19th at 2 p.m. So we hope to have a large turnout.
They always put on great shows, so I'm sure this one will be no different.
Yep.
And then the following week after that, we have our annual blood drive put on by the American Red Cross, and a lot of the students in the Junior Student Council help run that as well. So any students and teachers can help donate blood during that.
We also get a really big turnout in years past recently, so that's really awesome to see.
Free T-shirts when you donate.
Yes, that's a big thing. And cookies, right?
Cookies and juice boxes.
And then we have a football game tomorrow night against Holliston. And then what's awesome about this game is that National Honor Society will be donating, will be collecting donations and giving it to the Hope for Heroes drive, which is awesome.
And also right now at the school, CARE is doing a fundraiser to raise money for the victims in Puerto Rico.
Yep.
So it's just monetary donations, and we'll be donating that to UNICEF, who will do whatever they would do with it to help out.
So we're very excited about that. And then fall sports are coming to a close, and we have our winter sports meeting on November 13th. So we're hoping for a big turnout there.
That's pretty much it.
Great. So a lot going on.
A
Definitely. Any questions for Amelia or Amanda?
I do, Joe.
Mike?
Yeah.
So just a question, tomorrow night's football game must be a non-league game, because Holliston is part of Tri-Valley.
Yes, I believe
Yeah,
it's just
non-league.
Yeah, non-league.
Scott?
Jim, I think, was
No, I
first.
just
and then
actually,
I'll go.
I just want to congratulate you on Spirit Week. It was absolutely phenomenal. I saw
thank
some of
you.
the pictures. My son was involved in it too,
Mhm.
and the participation is fantastic. So you
Yeah.
guys do a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's kind of funny to say that because student leadership, which we're a part of, and your son is, I think, part of it too.
He is. He's vice
Yep.
president of his class.
We all come together. It's really awesome. We want every year we work to making it better and better and better. So
Yeah,
it's really awesome.
you
the
guys put a lot of
participation we
effort
get.
in, so congratulations
Thank
and
you.
thank you for all your effort.
So thank you, ladies. I know that coming and speaking in front of a crowd is not always the most fun, exciting thing you could be doing on a Thursday evening, but we certainly appreciate that. My question that I usually ask for, especially seniors that are coming in, is so how is the college application process going? Where are you? Where is the senior class in that process right now?
I personally am all done
Yeah.
applying.
I think what's nice is that our class is very motivated and driven just to like send it in and send all the applications in and get it over with. So I think based on like my friends and people I've talked to, we're pretty much done with it. Got a couple left to go to send in, and then yeah, we'll be
All we
fine.
can do is wait now.
Exactly. The waiting game begins.
Get it done before the holidays so you can sit back and enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's right.
Excellent. Where are you two applying? What's your top choice?
Oh, goodness.
Mine is Endicott.
Okay.
So University of Connecticut.
Okay. Well, good luck to you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you,
you.
ladies.
Good luck. Thank you for
Thank you
coming
so
in.
much.
Love your sneakers. That's what I
Thank
used to wear on the
you.
basketball court back in the day. I guess I'm
Date
dating
yourself, baby.
myself.
You are dating yourself. Thank
Become
you, guys.
fashionable now, Mike.
Your father can
Yeah.
explain who Larry Bird was.
It wasn't a guy named Michael Jordan back then.
No.
Are you covering the FICO?
Yes, I can
Alright,
do.
so next order of business is the FICO agreement.
So this is an annual item. It's just re-upping the Bi-County Collaborative Agreement for the year, and it just requires signatures from all the members.
Do we need a vote as well, I believe?
Yes.
Yes, there's a vote required as well
Yeah.
to continue the agreement.
So before we go to a vote, I just had a quick question. So, let me just pull it up here. So this is, all we're doing here is agreeing to the amendment to include Uxbridge and Hopedale, right?
Correct.
As participating districts. So there's a reference in the agreement to non-member tuition, and they increase it from 20% to 25%. What's the member tuition? So what are we paying for FICO?
It depends on the program.
Okay.
So there's a number of different programs. So, and I can get that for you and break it down by program, but it's program specific.
Okay. And what's the difference between BICO and that new Riverside school that opened up in Milford last
So
year?
the Riverside School, and I'm forgetting that they used to be falling under what's called Chapter 766, which is out of district special education schools. There's a different designation now, but the Bi-County Collaborative is almost similar to like a BVT, where there's a number of districts that are connected to like a particular school or a particular set of schools, whereas the Riverside School is it's an independent entity, and we have
Okay.
students that attend both Bi-County Collaborative and other collaborative schools, as well as the independent private schools, and it's generally based on student needs.
Okay.
Just quick question for you, just for clarity's sake, for those who may be watching at home. Bi-County Collaborative is specific is where it's not like, it's like BVT in that there's multiple towns that contribute to it from a financial support.
Correct.
It's not anything like BVT. It's a very different type of a
They provide
school.
special education
They provide
programs.
special education
Correct.
support. It's not a technical high school.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
which
from
I
a-
understood, but from the way, from
Yeah,
a
no, it's-
position,
it's-
I just want to make sure to add clarity around it is, it's like BVT in the way the funding is done.
From
It
a
is not,
membership
from a membership perspective.
Correct.
It is not from an educational perspective. It's a very, very different type of school. It's specific for special needs children.
Correct, and we benefit by being part of.
Oh,
it.
yeah, no question. Every year we vote on this, so.
All right, so do I have a motion to agree to the amendment to include the 2 additional member districts? So motion from Scott, seconded by John. All in favor? All right, thank you.
It actually just required your signature, not the group signature.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's all set.
So we're good to go.
All right, and then are you covering community use as well, or, let's see, Lenny here.
Yes, I can do that.
So it looks like
So
there,
it's another, it's an annual, do you mind doing it, just getting the screen up?
yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
So this
it's just
next
really
one is
focused.
to appoint Amy Tamati and Joe Arcudi to new 3-year terms. So do we have a motion from Mike, seconded by Jim? All in favor? All right. Great.
All right.
Just as a comment on that, they've served on that committee for quite a while, and just kind of to thank them for their service and the interest that they've taken over the years in the Milford Public Schools and community use. They've done a great job, and it's nice to see them continuing
Yeah.
for the district.
You know, Jen, you make a valid point because, you know, not only do they serve on community use, but like Amy's now chairman of the
Youth Commission.
Youth Commission, and Joe, I believe, is still on the Park Commission, and so they're running in and out of meetings. You know, Amy will have a meeting at the youth center, but she'll go to community use first, spend an hour there, and then, you know, so yeah, that's a great point. You know, thank them for giving back to the community.
All right. Next agenda item is policy item, the religious holiday observance. So I know policy committee met before this meeting. Do we have any
So I can,
updates?
yeah, I can jump in on this one. There's actually 2 recommendations, and there should be 2 sheets, and this is just from the meeting that just concluded. The top one is the religious holiday observance and religious expression policy, and it has some redlining on the second page. And the other piece, it says religious symbols. At the top, it says language from Jerry Moody. Are the 2 sheets that I'm going to be referring to. The first change that we're recommending was a unanimous one, and if you go to the backside of the religious observance policy, to number 6, freedom of expression, the recommended change is students and staff personal expression of religious beliefs instead of just students. And I believe we've discussed this as a full committee as well, at least as a discussion. The second option is something we want to bring to the committee's attention. Currently, the policy that's in place, the original language is in black, not the redlined version. So there's an option to keep the original policy, include the redlined version, or the third option is to include the language that's on the separate religious symbols page. And I'm going to read that compromise language, and I'll also read. Let me read the original first, and then the compromise language, and then does it make sense to discuss it, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So this is the current policy language. As part of their teaching about religious holidays and the role religion plays in history, literature, culture, and the arts, teachers may display religious symbols and displays associated with religious holidays as teaching aids or resources only during the period of instruction. Holiday displays are permitted in public spaces such as hallway, cafeteria, or common space, as long as they have educational value. No such symbol or display may be visible from outside the school facility. No religious symbols, included in those related to holidays, should be represented in classrooms or on classroom materials unless these materials are directly related to curricular studies about the religion or culture. And that's the kind of changed redline version of that. The proposed language to potentially replace that, if the committee decides to go in that direction, is as part of their teaching about religious holidays and the role religion plays in history, literature, culture, and the arts, teachers may display religious symbols and displays associated with the religious holidays as teaching aids or resources only during the period of instruction. Religious symbols with direct religious connotation should not be represented in classrooms or on class materials, except as involved in such instruction, not destruction. Modest general holiday displays, excluding such direct religious symbols, are permitted in classrooms with the approval of and at the discretion of the building principal. Holiday displays are permitted in public spaces such as hallways, cafeterias, or common space, as long as they have educational value. No such symbol or display should be visible outside the school facility. So those are kind of, 2 potential options for number 5.
Okay. And I know you've had several conversations with staff as well about the policy. So did the policy weigh in on this language as well? I mean, did the staff weigh in on
Yeah,
this
the
language?
staff weighted on the policy in general. The overwhelming message I received from the policy, or from the faculty, is there. What's going on over there, LeGrow?
I was just trying to open my water. Trying to be discreet, that didn't work.
That wasn't
Very discreet.
That wasn't happening.
Sorry.
The overwhelming feedback from the faculty
religious
was they were
policy.
just looking for direction. A number of people expressed a number of different opinions, but the one thing that was overwhelming is they want some direction around this issue.
Okay. And where's the policy committee on this?
We're split on this one. So that's the reason why, ultimately, the reason why we're bringing this to the full committee is that we were unable to reach consensus. The compromise language was as a result of, as Kevin said, Jerry's feedback and kind of observing the last the previous meeting. So we're sort of a split philosophy on this right now as far as, and looking for really feedback from the rest of the larger committee of what's the pleasure of the larger committee.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so really, this is the only point of contention at this point, is
Is
this
number
one
5.
section, number 5.
Mhm.
Everyone's in agreement with the rest of the policy.
Yeah, I would say we're, and Jen and Jim, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I would say we're probably 98% of the way there. It's this one piece that's the point where we've reached an impasse.
And the original intent of this policy, and obviously many communities have adopted similar policies throughout the Commonwealth. The original intent was threefold, right? It was, one, to document what was already being done in practice in terms of guidelines for things like excused absences, homework,
Yes.
Extracurricular activities. The second was protecting a student and teacher's right to freedom of expression, which is clearly in the policy. And then the third was ensuring that that there was some sort of educational purpose, and that we created an environment where the students can learn about different cultures and different traditions. And I think that's reflected in the policy as well. And when I read section 5 and the proposed language in section 5, it's very similar to the language that Jerry provided. It sounds to me like it's saying the same thing. I think Jerry just takes it one step further and gives the principal a little bit of discretion over the types of
In
decorations
classroom.
that they put in the classroom.
Yes.
So are we, in doing that and providing that discretion, are we putting the principals in a difficult position?
So the principals by statute are responsible for everything that goes on in their building anyways. So whether we chose to, really the fundamental difference is in the language that's on here, not to be confused with, I'll kind of refer to it as is the language that's currently written versus the compromise language by Jerry. The language that's currently written prohibits in-classroom decorations of any kind, as it relates, as long as if it's not relating to the curriculum for religious holidays. The compromise language allows modest decorations at principal discretion inside classroom. That's really what it is. That's really the foundational difference between those two, is whether it would allow, the principals are responsible for monitoring this in both cases, because they're responsible for enforcing the policies. So the principals are responsible either way. It really just says, one that's on the policy says you cannot have in-classroom religious decorations, religious holiday decorations. The compromise language from Jerry says that you are allowed modest with principal approval. That's, and I'm kind of speaking, but Jen and Jim, I don't know if you guys have if you're seeing that differently than that.
Well, I guess, are you looking for input at this point? Is that how you want to kind of run this?
Yeah, I'd like to get feedback from all the members before we
So
move
do you
it to a
want to do
vote.
from a member who's
Can I ask
not
a
on the-
clarifying question?
Yeah.
Has the subcommittee discussed the proposed language from town council?
Yes.
And
We
you're
reached
split on
impasse,
that?
yes.
Your impasse on that too, okay.
Yes. Well, I think we're at an impasse on whether or not to replace the current number 5 with the new language.
Right.
So, Mr. Chairman, the first question I would ask is this an official second reading of the religious policy, or are we just having a discussion?
This is a discussion. It's not posted on it's not posted on the agenda as a
Correct.
reading. It's just it's just a policy review.
I think, my opinion, I think the first thing we need to address is the superintendent's comment that the faculty is looking for direction.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is, if you remember last year, there was a lot of discussion around, and it was the famous sweater comment. You know, as an educator, I'm not allowed to wear a sweater in the classroom with a Christmas tree. So I personally think before we address this, we need to get some kind of direction out.
I can actually answer that question,
Okay.
Mike. I put together a document in concert with the policy that kind of gives direction on a number of areas, which I think will clarify. What I'm waiting for is this last piece of policy, so I can kind of, dot my i's and cross my t's. So
We're
it
waiting
kind
for
of,
this.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it kind of aligns with it. So basically we went piece for piece, and I can share that with the committee as well. via email, just so you have a copy of the letter. But we've kind of vetted it at the policy subcommittee level, and the only thing we're kind of waiting on is the language around number 5 and how that would play out in the letter that gives kind of general guidelines to faculty members.
So when you say that's the direction they're looking for the direction in number 5?
Yeah, so for example, let me see if I can pull the letter up, but for
He's-
example, like.
I think
I
Mike
gave
just-
go
him,
ahead.
I
She
gave him a
just handed
copy
it
of the
to me.
original.
Oh, you did? Okay,
He-
perfect,
yeah.
perfect,
Yeah.
Yeah.
perfect.
But to use your example, Mike, so last year there was confusion over whether or not someone could wear a Christmas sweater, right?
Right.
And the policy itself is very clear that we're protecting people's freedom of expression. So
Right.
if you want to wear a sweater, wear a sweater. There's nothing in this policy that prevents that
Right.
whatsoever.
And we outline it in the letter as well.
Where the gray area comes up is whether it's in classroom or not in classroom. The other piece that we did discuss, and I brought up, was in the current proposed language, not to be confused with the compromise language, the way that it's specifically written is, it says holiday displays are permitted in public areas such as hallway, cafeterias, or common space, as long as they have educational value. No such symbols or displays may be visible from outside the school facility. No religious symbols, including those related to holidays, should be represented in classrooms and or on classroom materials unless these materials are directly related to, curricular study about about religion or culture, as opposed to it's about religion or culture. It's just a question of it's whether it's allowed in the class. It's really whether we're doing decorations in the classroom or not. That's really and Jen, I don't know if you want to add color to that.
Yeah,
What's the goal and the intent?
so I think going back, so we adopted a religious observance policy in August of 2016, and, just to kind of capture the history a little bit, we rolled it out last year, and I think to your point, Mike, there was significant confusion about what this all really meant.
Mhm.
And so it came back to our table, we had, parents came and commented, people share their perspectives, and so we were asked to take another look. So we went back, we absolutely agreed with some things that needed, unanimously, I'm pretty sure, that needed to be clarified, which we did. And I think we all also agreed that we needed our superintendent to go back, and we asked him to address staff. I can't remember if we asked you to address parents or not, but you did address the faculty in a couple of different ways. You solicited feedback electronically and in some meetings that you held.
Correct.
And you created this document that Kevin shared with us where he took the entire policy and he kind of broke it down into what does number 1 mean, what does number 2 mean, what do these things look like in the classroom? And a letter was written to accompany that to explain very clearly to staff what is this going to look like. So in the midst of all that, I think then we started to engage in some further question about number 5, which is what is the definition of a religious symbol and what does that mean? So I can only speak for myself, but my take on this is that we may not be in this position where we are right now. A year ago when we voted on this policy, we weren't wordsmithing and we weren't doing a lot of what-ifing. We were just saying, here is a policy that we think is going to work and it's going to address kind of a long-standing issue that we've had, which is an overabundance of holiday decor around the month of December. And when we came back to the table and started to discuss it, I think it kind of took a little bit of a different life than we had expected. My expectation was that we were going to go back to staff, gather input, and re-clarify for people. So moving into the next holiday season, people would have what you're asking for, which is the direction. So I guess, in my estimation, if we stick to something as simple as that, that was my original understanding, that it was to provide direction for staff, to remove a lot of decorative items for lots of different reasons, and to make teaching and learning during the month of December more typical and more in line with what we see during the other 9 months of the school year. So I was personally hoping that we were going to do what we had asked. The superintendent did the things that we asked him to do. We're just coming upon another holiday season. There was very, very little feedback that the superintendent got from staff other than wanting direction.
And I would categorize it as a variety of feedback, but I would say the overall theme is direction.
So that was my hope, even beyond getting into kind of the wordsmithing of item number 5 on here. I was hoping that we would move forward with the adopted policy and see if this year became easier for people and more tolerable for people based on the way it ended up. So that's kind of my take on that.
Any questions or comments?
If I may, just, so with regards to that, so it's a couple of things. There's, with any policy, there's the spirit and the letter, right? So there's the spirit of the policy and what's the intent behind it. And then there's the letter of the policy. So, and this is where, we had a discussion about this. So it's different, depends on what your interpretation is, and this is where it's left open to interpretation. So this is where I would say, so as it relates in here, and this is part of the conversation that we just had, is, and I would ask the committee, so if I'm and we'll put a hypothetical because it's actually occurred, I'm a school teacher, and in the month of December, I choose to bring in a Christmas tree, of whatever size, and bring it in and put it in my classroom. Is our intent to say that that teacher is in breach of this policy? Is that our intent?
So in that situation, is the teacher
Violating
there
this
to,
policy?
but he's there to, is he teaching about the holiday or is he celebrating the
No,
holiday?
it's a decoration. It's a decoration that goes in the room, just as you may put a turkey on the wall during Thanksgiving. They may bring in a picture or a poster of a turkey and put it on the wall during Thanksgiving. It's a decoration they've chosen to bring into their classroom. They've chosen to bring in a Christmas tree and put it in.
Joe, I want to bring us back to, I guess, what I was saying about a year ago. Right now, we have a policy in place, and the group that can interpret that current policy, which is in place, is this group right here. So to answer that question, or any question from a teacher or administrator, that needs to come to us. So, but that's with the current policy, but where are we going with this? And to Scott's point, and I think to Jen's point, what's the intent? What are we trying to do? I think a lot of this got blown up last year with a few simple interpretations of the policy, rightfully so, wrongfully so, but in the spirit just ran with it, that we can do this, we can't do this. So we need to, I think, if there's any questions right now on our current policy, interpret it, or interpret it soon, or then, come to a conclusion on what our policy is. And even with that, we're gonna need some interpretations. People are looking for direction, and it's, you can't write it so specific that it covers every instance or every what if. So I can see why everybody's looking for guidance.
Yeah.
and
And that's why I would tell you my personal feelings is favoring more towards the discretion of the principals with allowing the in-classroom. It allows some of that freedom of expression. It does allow some level of creativity within the classroom, some flexibilities for teachers within reason. It gives the responsibilities to the principal. But I do ask that question because if the proposal is to go with that language, that was part of our discussion is how do we, because we're gonna be asked the questions, our policy, to John's point, okay, I put in a Christmas tree. Am I violating that policy?
Well, I think-
Because the United States Supreme Court says no. The way this policy is written, it says religious symbols, which the United States Supreme Court has said a Christmas tree is not. It's
Right.
non-secular. So if the intent is that we don't want, if that's the intent of this board, is to not allow Christmas, if we go forward with that language, if the intent of that is to make it so that we are not allowing Christmas trees, indoor Christmas decorations as an example, in a classroom, then we would need to adjust the wording in this policy as it stands anyways, because very specifically that is it calls out no religious symbols. That very specific one has been weighed in by the United States Supreme Court saying it is not a religious symbol. It's a non-secular decoration. Just the same, and is viewed as the same as having a turkey up for Thanksgiving. It may not be our own personal opinions, but the United States Supreme Court has weighed in on it. So we, being a governing body in the United States, have to follow that. So if that's our intent of this board, then we would need to adjust that language anyways, if that's the intent. If it's not the intent, then we can go, then it changes.
And just, I guess I'm asking, or maybe I'm not asking, but right now, we have a policy in place, and we have this reading, which is not a second reading, which isn't up for vote tonight, so we have the immediate going forward with what's, I mean, we're into November now, what's appropriate and what's not, or what's allowed and what's not. Is that gonna, raise some emotions real quick, because we're on a future policy change right now, which isn't in effect today, we're not voting tonight, so, you know, we're gonna blink and it's gonna be December.
We, just from a point of order, we could vote on it, we can vote to take one or the other because it is an agenda item. You don't have to do multiple readings, we have done a reading. If we chose to amend the language, we actually, because it's our own policy, you actually could, Mr. Chairman, take a vote if you so chose this evening.
Didn't that question,
No, he asked if it was the second reading, but we are allowed to vote on it.
Yeah, so what's up for debate essentially is, do we adopt the proposed language that's in section 5, or do we adopt the compromise language that Jerry provided, right?
Yeah,
That's essentially
but-
what this comes down to.
But I asked a question that is important to this discussion, that I would ask that be weighed in on, because that's gonna be a question that is a question that has already occurred last year, and that
The question
helps
about
give-
non-secular symbols.
You got it.
Right. And
Because
that-
right now, that's not addressed in this.
Right, and that's really what's at the heart of this issue.
You got it.
is
That's exactly what it
What's a
is.
religious symbol versus what's a non-secular symbol, right? I
Right.
think everyone is in agreement that we don't want to cross in the classroom.
Yeah, we're not looking for
Yeah.
manger scenes in the classrooms
Right.
or anything like that. If I'm a school teacher, I put up a Santa Claus, or I put up a Christmas tree. As the policy stands today, to John's point, we have a standing policy. I'm not violating the policy. I want to make sure, if the intent of this board is that we feel that is not what we want to have happen in the classrooms, and that's what we want to change as a board, we need to make sure we give Kevin that air cover. Because right now, a teacher comes in, puts a classroom in with the current policy, and we continue on with the current language, that teacher is not in violation of that policy, and they have the United States Supreme Court standing right behind them. Because our policy says religious symbols. If that's the intent of this board, and I guess that's part of my question, to your point. The heart of the issue is do we want Christmas, or are we as a board wanting or accepting of decorations for Christmas and or Hanukkah in a classroom, or do we not?
So, thank you for asking the question that way. And so the first time I spoke, I felt like I wanted to talk about the history of where we've been, which is different from where we are today, which is weighing two different versions of a policy. So what I can only speak for myself, and what I can say is I have seen over the course of my children's education in Milford, and even before that, the preponderance of Christian-related artifacts in classrooms as decorations has become overwhelming. And it has become overwhelming to the point where we have had some parents speak up, maybe not a lot, understanding that we are definitely in a majority, a town where we have a majority of Christian practicing residents. However, when I look at schools and when I walk through a school building every day, and I look for what should be in a classroom and what should teachers and students be focusing on. And teachers and students should not be focusing on topics of religious holidays unless they are directly related to the curriculum. And when I look in a classroom, and I said this at our policy subcommittee earlier tonight, I'm sorry to repeat myself for those of you who are there, what I want to see is teaching charts. I want to see teaching tools. I want to see examples of student work. I want to see teachers who are spending their time digging into the curriculum, the expected rigor that we are mandated to roll out in our classrooms per the Mass Department of Education. And what I don't think is appropriate to see in classrooms are distractions that are getting kids worked up and riled up, and perhaps make some students uncomfortable because things are put on the walls of a classroom that in their mind are related to a religion. And when you are the religious minority, it is difficult to see Santa and wreaths and Christmas trees and all of those things decorating your classroom. What is not difficult for me to understand, and this was what I thought was the positive part of this policy, is the fact that we can use these artifacts for teaching tools. So if you're a teacher and you have a lesson and you're teaching about the differences in your classroom and you're celebrating the cultures in your classroom, if you spend 3 days discussing the similarities and differences between Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, and Christmas, and you have different artifacts from those holidays in your classroom during that instructional period, that is totally fine. If you ask a student to write a compare-contrast on things that they do during the month of December or April, when some celebrate Easter and some celebrate Passover, and artifacts are hung on the wall because they were created and generated by students, that again is perfectly fine. That's very different and has a very different feel to me than a teacher making a deliberate decision to decorate a classroom in a certain way. A classroom doesn't need decorations. A classroom needs teaching tools, and it needs a teacher who's spending his or her time focusing the learning. And that's not to take away the fun, and it's not to say we don't want to plan fun activities and engaging activities and getting our kids motivated, especially at tricky times of year where no matter what we do, we can stand on our head and kids are still distracted during the month of December. But I think trying to keep business as usual and focusing our energies on where they need to be, which is reading, writing, arithmetic, science, social studies, and history, and adding culture and tradition into the month of December through instruction, very deliberately planned instruction, is where we should be spending our time. So to answer the question bluntly, I don't think, I am not in favor of any policy that would allow for anything that's related to a religious holiday, whether the Supreme Court deems it a religious artifact or not. If it's related by nature to a religious holiday, I personally don't think it should be in a classroom. And if that means that, and I appreciate the effort to make a compromise, I can also tell you as a school principal, there's a lot of gray in the compromise in terms of what an individual principal believes. I've worked in a district where there were 3 elementary schools and 3 Jewish principals, and we all would have looked at something differently than a district where you might have 3 Christian principals or 3 whatever kind of other religions are out there, because that then you're moving something into a very subjective realm. So I would prefer, if we need to update that language in number 5 to make it very clear about what kinds of decorations or classroom hangings are appropriate for the classrooms in Milford, then I would be in favor of revisiting that one for that purpose.
Mike?
I think what's important is that we seem to be, are we talking about Christmas or are we talking about all religious holidays? We seem to be hung up on Christmas here. And I think you need to consider, to Scott's point, the turkey on the wall, which is Thanksgiving. You got Christmas, you got Easter, probably the biggest religious holiday on the calendar. So I think we need to regroup and go back to, are we talking about all religious holidays or are we focusing on Christmas?
Well, it's all religious holidays. I think Christmas is just the example.
I think what's important is that, Kevin, in this document that Jen just provided to me is great, but I still go back to, I still think your faculty is looking for direction. I still think they're confused. I still think, to Scott's point, putting it on the building principals, there are other things over the years that we've designated to the responsibility of the building principals, and no disrespect to the building principals, it just didn't get followed through on because maybe they didn't want to deal with it. So I think that's a gray area that we got to look at. I think there's too much up in the air still, even tonight, with all this documentation for us to even vote on it, you know. And I'm a devout Catholic. I believe in religious holidays, but I also believe in respecting other people. And I just think that there's, you know, Jerry's version, and then we get the version here, number 5, but I think that we still need to go back to the most important part of it, and that's our faculty. So that they have a clear direction, again, to Scott's point, so that they know, listen, if I bring this in or I hang this up, okay, I'm okay. I'm not personally worried about the United States Supreme Court, and I don't mean you any disrespect. I'm worried about what goes on in Milford. And I want to make I think the first thing we have to do is make our faculty comfortable so that they can follow through and make our students, you know, comfortable and our parents comfortable. That's my personal opinion.
John?
the question I raised, and I don't disagree with anything that Mike said, is what are we doing in the interim? Because we have a policy in place and these people are looking for guidance, and I don't think we're offering it right now. Because, you know, this is all good to revisit town council's proposal, revisit, you know, the red line, number 5, religious symbols, but again, I mean, I don't think we wanna leave tonight with people being more confused than, you know, before the day started.
I agree, but I also don't think it would be, in my opinion, I'm not sure it would be appropriate to vote on the policy, because it wasn't in the agenda to vote on the policy, without giving the public an opportunity to come and address the board, because the public may have strong opinions one way or the other, right? So I think it needs to be a very specific agenda item that we're gonna have a discussion and a vote on the policy, so that people can come and
Yeah, I'm not,
voice their.
to be clear, I wasn't suggesting that we vote on anything, I'm raising the,
We gotta give direction to the staff.
Well, would Kevin like
the
to
problems
share
that
some of
exist.
this? Because he did
Yeah.
put together a document
so-
that you may or may not agree with, but he did put something together that does have some direction.
That provides
And
clarity.
maybe you don't want, maybe you don't like it anymore, I don't know.
John?
No, yeah.
So,
you know, I don't need to see this now.
so
I mean, that's something we may wanna distribute out to the board. And give us
Yeah, no, I
time-
can send
give us
that
time to
separate. I can send
digest
that
it and
separate.
read it.
I just wanna make sure I send the right version. I don't wanna do
That's-
Yeah.
this moment.
No,
And so that document you put together is very specific to the language that's in
As
the
it
policy
stands
today. as
And it
stands
hits a
today,
few
right?
other
So it gives-
areas as well that maybe aren't directly aligned to the policy, like the elf on the shelf and a couple things like that, that aren't necessarily directly addressed in the policy.
Yeah. And so do you feel it would be prudent, because we're not gonna have another meeting now until November 16th, right? So we'll put this on as an agenda item for that meeting, and we'll give people an opportunity to voice whatever opinion or concerns they have. Is November 16th enough time, or do you think we need to get that out to the staff now so they understand how the policy is currently written, and then if there are changes, revise the document, send it out afterwards, or do we just hold off on sending them anything until the final decision's made on this?
You know, my worry is that if I send something out and we change course, it could potentially cause more confusion. I think there was a communication breakdown last year, and I think it caused some confusion across the board. And I hate to repeat that again. That's my worry. And you know, we're heading into the holiday season pretty quickly. And they're tough issues because, you know, I think people have very strong opinions on, you know, I don't want to say both sides. I think there's a variety of sides, and there's almost a continuum of opinion on the issue. I like what Mike had to say about, you know, the comfort piece for everybody. You know, I think the one piece that's in kind of dispute in terms of the policy itself is the modest decorations with principal discretion versus no decorations is really what it comes down to. And you know, we talk about all religious holidays, but the one that kind of we see kind of issues around decorations really is Christmas, and that's why we're kind of talking about Christmas.
But to your
So-
point, Mike, the policy is written for all religious holidays.
It is, but in, you know, also to Mike's point, in Milford, we're, you know, kind of focused on the Christmas issue.
Yep.
I think the sooner we come to some kind of conclusion on it, I think the better. I think we'd be okay if we came to a decision on, what's the next meeting, the
16th.
16th. So if we came to a decision on the 16th, I think we'd still be okay, because we're still in that kind of the pre-Thanksgiving mode. And I think from my perspective, in terms of getting a communication plan out, I can set up a plan, whatever the committee's pleasure is. But it would, you know, we just have to make a decision then, because then the next meeting's in December, and we're kind of in it.
With you.
That would be my only request. I think if people thought about it, thought about the options, and we brought it back to the table on the 16th and made a decision, I'd say 95% of the letter, just like 95% of the policy, is pretty much good to go. It's really that the decorations piece is really what we're talking about. And that's really what, you know, what the impact is where it's gonna be. So I would say, I mean, my recommendation to the board would be, let's contemplate it for 2 weeks and then be ready to make a decision and a vote on that particular piece. And then we can give direction to the faculty and kind of move forward, and I can have a communication plan ready to go.
So, can you send out that?
I can. I'm gonna do it
Document.
tomorrow morning, just because I wanna make sure that went through about 20 iterations too,
Yeah.
the letter. I wanna make sure I give you the most recent copy.
Yeah.
Or the whole committee, the most recent copy.
And Jen touched on it earlier. The way the policy is written now, it doesn't preclude anyone from bringing in that Christmas tree and having it be part of the lesson plan and talking about the tradition and the culture of Christian traditions and cultures, and then bring in menorah and talk about Jewish traditions and cultures. So you did a great job sort of explaining how they can incorporate it into the lesson. Scott, from your perspective, the decoration, what's the value that you see in the decoration? Just putting something up on a wall or something in the room permanently during the season.
So there's an engagement it's not specific to any religion or any specific holiday. There's a piece that goes with, from an educational perspective, with teachers, where they like to be able to add different pieces that help them to engage students and help the rooms feel specifically, and again, we're being very transparent. We're not really talking about the high school. We're not talking even really about the middle school. This is predominantly occurring at the elementary schools, both Woodland, Brookside, and Memorial. And I think Shining Star to probably a little bit lesser extent. It invites the warm and engaging components. It's in the fall, it's you putting up leaves, right, which has no religious impact, but it's a decoration that teachers will have. They'll put their students' names on leaves for the first day of school. If they, it's a decoration that goes on in the classroom to help create an engaging environment and a warm and welcoming environment for students. The decorations of different seasons will vary. In some cases, it will be a turkey that they may put the kids' names on, or put something on if they're doing within a classroom to engage the students. It may be an arts and crafts project where they draw the kid's hand.
And that's all
That
fine, and
becomes the
that's
turkey.
allowed.
Right, and it is, and it's allowed because those are not
Yeah.
relating to a religious holiday. The question is what do we then determine as a religious holiday? Because that then goes to that next iteration, because there's a lot of holidays that have religious connection that we celebrate, where there are decorations that come on. And we can address that as we go forward here. But that's really the intent is, okay, so if I'm a school teacher and I choose that I want to have a modest decoration, again, I'm not saying, and I use the expression in our policy subcommittee meeting, so I apologize for those that have already heard it, but I'm not saying that we should walk into a classroom and a student should feel like Target threw up in the classroom. It shouldn't. That's the reason for the modest component and for that intent. It's, if you want to include some level of decoration, you go into the foreign language classes. There's maps and pictures of things that are not curriculum related, but they'll be flags of other countries that speak the language. They're not curriculum related, they're not used as teaching aids, but there'll be a picture of them up on the wall.
And around
They're not
Christmas
being
season.
touched on, but around Christmas season, they may put up a Christmas tree. They may put up a wreath. They may put up and again,
Or
I'm
a
not
snowflake, or a
or a
snowman.
snowflake or a snowman or
that's-
something of
doesn't
that
have a
nature.
religious connotation.
Correct, that may not have the religious connotation, but that's the intent. That's the intent that I've heard from school teachers is, hey, it's something that I use to help welcome and engage and create a warm, welcoming environment. And I want to do it across all components. And it's, my chosen freedom of expression where I choose that this is something that, I'd like to be able to decorate. I like to be able to decorate my room according to the ongoing, most relevant part of the season that's going on.
The question is that a warm, welcoming environment for every student?
And what I would say is that's where I would go back to Kevin and say, what's the impact that this has had across the students' population that we have? And that's where I would come back and say, okay, so what has been the public outcry for one versus another? And again, that's why I'm saying the modest piece, because we can make the concern then comes, and this is what I've said before, is this all came back and started as a result of a concern that happened in a classroom, and I understand that, and it's a very serious concern, and I certainly understand that. My fear is that rather than address that concern as the issue that it was at the time, as a one-off or as a two-off or as a, Kevin, I don't want to put words in your mouth, You had said to us a
It was
number.
less than 10.
So we've had roughly less than 10 concerns that have been raised to us over decorations in a classroom. With 4,200 students, we're talking about complaints of less than 10. Not saying they should be ignored, because they shouldn't be. We should be listening to them. But rather than addressing those 10 concerns in those specific pieces and those specific instances, our answer is we're creating a policy that impacts 4,200 students based on the concerns of less than 10. Rather than addressing them as one-off, empowering the principals to make those decisions, we as a board are going across and trying to impact a policy that now impacts 4,200 students. I'm saying, I think that there's a piece of this, and again, I want to be very clear, the first part of this policy I think is really important because we gotta have this outlined. This is the absolution for homework and missing practices and sports and everything, fine. It's really as it relates to number 5. We're creating a policy to impact 4,200 students on the concerns of 10. My concern is and Jim raised a great question during the policy subcommittee, is at what point do we get concerns that are raised to us? Do we then look to make a policy change? I think that's a great question. At what point do we then are we trying to then create some additional policies to give guideline and give direction for our faculty and for our staff and for Kevin and for our students and the people of Milford based on feedback? My biggest concern, I'm not, it's not for any other purpose of it. It is a genuine concern, especially given what's going on in today's day and age in the media, is there's a lot going on with the NFL right now as it relates to the American flag and the national anthem. A lot. So if we have somewhere around 10 students that say, I feel uncomfortable, it's not a welcoming environment for me to walk in and see the American flag because it makes me feel a certain way. Are we then as a committee prepared to go down that route? As that's a policy, because it's something that makes me feel uncomfortable. So, I'm not saying it for any other reason than it is a genuine concern I have. We're seeing this in other places, and is that where we're looking to go? At the end of the day, I think this was a small issue that occurred. It doesn't mean it's unimportant. It means I'm saying small by the numbers. And that being said, I think it needed to be addressed by administration and handled in an appropriate way so that everyone felt comfortable and felt compromised, rather than trying to create a policy for that addressed the entire district. That's what I think this compromise language starts to address, that compromising and addressing it on a one-on-one basis.
John?
I guess what I'd like to ask is, and I want to ask it tonight, but I don't want the answer necessarily right now, maybe at the next meeting, is these relatively small number of issues, if there were principal discretion, would those issues have become such an issue, or would they have maybe been remediated more or less sooner than later? And again, I don't want to put anybody on the spot right now, but I want to look at that aspect as we consider this policy, whether or not to give this, to allow discretion, or do we just want to absolutely allow and prohibit each individual item, decoration, or symbol? Just something for future thought.
Mike?
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we take the superintendent's recommendation and move it to the meeting of the 16th. I think we've had enough discussion, and I think we're just going kind of round and round and round, so
Yeah.
I think that if we get some more information, give us time to kind of think about it and review what we have for documentation, I think the night of the 16th we should continue it.
We'll add it as an agenda item for the 16th. You'll share the document with the
Yeah, and I'll send it to
entire
everybody
committee.
tomorrow morning.
Thank you, thank you.
And then, if you wouldn't mind, too, and you may have already done this, just run that document by some of the staff to get feedback to see if there's any open questions. We may need to tweak it a little bit.
I think the questions are going to be around the decoration piece, so I think once we have a resolution on that, it's almost like a chicken or an egg kind of situation.
Right. Okay. All right, so now we have the second reading for the technology responsible use policy. Who's gonna run that one?
So this one, I don't think we made, we did a first reading last time. I don't believe there were any changes that were proposed by the committee at that time. So this is really just, it's a second reading. There were no proposed changes based on the last, it was redlined in the first reading that was done last week. There were no changes that were that were proposed, other than I think a grammatical change, but there were no foundational changes that were there was no policy level impacted changes, more just grammatical.
Yeah. So do we have a motion to approve the technology responsible use policy? Motion from Mike, seconded by Jen. All in favor? Right. And then we have a first reading for the sexual harassment policy.
I gotta get to this one. I have that in the packet, can I? Yep, thanks. So with this one, you can see it's, yep, it is, it's redlined out here. This really is just as a result to, this is the process and the procedures of it, rather than necessarily what the, Jerry actually came to the meeting and said, you know what, you've got two pieces of it. There's two pieces of this policy. There's what the definitions and policies are, and then there's what the procedures are. What we're discussing, what these first readings are, is on the procedure. When he reviewed the language from what the policy overall was, his recommendation to us is actually our current policy is okay as it currently stands. This really just, if you look, a lot of these are really as it relates to communication. So the first one is more grammatical in error. We did remove in paragraph 2 third parties, and really what that came down to was policing. How do we stop third parties? So a third party could be a parent that's saying something inappropriate. Third party could be, we have a contractor that's coming out. They don't work for Milford Public Schools. They work for some outside party. We can then, if we have a concern, or administration has a concern, or a parent has a concern, voice that concern to their employer, but they're not beholding to us. We can say we don't want that person to come back and work in our building anymore, and they can say, okay, well, you either have to cancel the contract or whatever, and we handle that with the vendor, but they don't work for us. We don't, that's what we talk about from a policing perspective. So it's a proposal to scratch that third parties, and at all times. So at all times, Jerry's feelings on that was at all times. So if I'm at home and I say something inappropriate to my brother or sister, technically I'm in violation of the policy. This is his example. So we just removed at all times. It's really just within the confines of being on school property or at a school event. Questions on that paragraph?
Down in that paragraph.
Okay. Next one is the next paragraph down. It's because Milford Public Schools takes allegation of sex-based harassment seriously, it will immediately acknowledge within 2 school days, I apologize, and respond promptly to complaints. So it's just acknowledging. So when a complaint is made, what this is basically saying, it said that we would immediately acknowledge, but there was no timeline that went along with it. So how do you determine immediate? So this just outlines this. It actually makes it consistent with other areas where, and this was based on feedback from Kevin, that 2 days was reasonable time for administration to be able to take it on. Acknowledgement is just, we've heard we are aware of your complaint. It's not saying whether we've done our investigation or not, because for some of these, the investigation can go on for quite some time, especially if there's legal ramifications. This is really just saying, when a complaint is registered, we're going to acknowledge that it's receipt within 2 school days. Is that, and
Yeah, that's
Okay.
exactly what we talked about.
So how does, sorry, quick question. So how does that align with any state reporting regulations? At the state level, do we have 2 days, or do we have more than that, less than that?
You know, I think my understanding is it's a gray area. I haven't seen like a specific number of days. I think to Scott's point, we want to acknowledge the complaint relatively quickly, within a couple of business days, but the investigation piece, in some cases can be very quick, in other cases could take a tremendous amount of time, just based on the complexity of the case or the particular allegation. So I don't think my understanding is there's not a specific timeline set up because of the varying levels of potential. Some cases are very simple, some cases are very complex. The simple ones can be resolved relatively quickly. The complex ones could take a significant amount of time. I think it'd be difficult to put parameters around a particular investigation period.
So how does this align with like the Form 51A filing the HESC.
Completely different situation.
Completely different.
Yeah.
So 50, you wouldn't
So
file 51A for a sexual harassment?
It depends, possibly. If it were towards a student, potentially, but it's so contextual to the case that I couldn't say across the board a blanket statement. Like a 51A relates to a situation of abuse or neglect. And what we would do in that case is if we feel like there's some allegation of abuse or neglect related to a student, we would file a form with the Department of Children and Families, and then they'd make a determination of which way to kind of go forward, basically. This is more about a particular allegation that we're addressing at the school level. In some cases, we may, in concert with our investigation, internal investigation, file a 51A, but it wouldn't necessarily, one doesn't necessarily connect to the other.
Okay.
Can I just add, I don't know if you were concerned that it seemed like too long of a period of time, the 2 days?
Yeah.
I think that our intent, maybe you guys can clarify if I didn't get it right, was that we just want to make sure that a person who makes the complaint, it receives acknowledgement that the school has received your complaint. So I'm thinking about a situation where maybe it goes to the principal, and the principal's off site at a conference one day, and they don't get to begin to even look at it until the first thing the next morning. And in my estimation, it just, or you might, as the principal or whoever's doing the investigation, you might start gathering some information before you want to make that first phone call back to the family and say, yeah, we hear what you have, we've already started looking at things, we just want to make sure you know that we're looking at it. Doesn't mean they're getting an answer, it means they're just getting kind of, it's like if you can't, answer somebody's email, yes, I received your email and I'm looking into it. That's how I interpreted that we put the
And that was the
48 hours in
intent. It's
there.
really just, it's the acknowledgement of a receipt. It doesn't,
Right.
it's not acknowledging action being taken. Action may have been taken immediately. Action may require other things. This is, we wanted to put a parameters around it that whoever is filing the complaint, we're at least saying, hey, we heard you, thank you. We're gonna take it on. It may not be, but I think to Jen's point, yeah, I think you actually, even in the meeting, even specifically called that example out.
Yeah, I guess, so this isn't talking about specifically about a principal. This is just talking about the schools acknowledging that
We
there
received
was
it.
an issue,
Correct.
right?
Mhm.
So
Or that we
if-
received a complaint.
That
Right.
we received a complaint, right? So if my son or daughter approaches a teacher or a coach or a guidance counselor and says, I had this issue,
Mhm.
what this is saying is that that guidance counselor would then potentially have 2 days to have conversations with the principal and others before.
No. It's, what it's saying is it's got 2 days to say to the student, I heard your complaint.
The expectation in that situation is the guidance counselor or teacher would go to the principal would then acknowledge to the parent that I've received the complaint and we're gonna move
Right,
forward with
right,
the
and that's,
investigation.
so that's where I'm going with this, though, right? So the student goes to the teacher or the guidance counselor, says, I had this issue.
Yep.
That teacher or guidance counselor potentially has 2 days to have a conversation with the principal or other authorities, whoever it may be, before someone gets back to the parent or the student to let them know, hey, we received this complaint,
It's possible.
right? So is that too much time? So if I'm a parent and something happens, I wanna know
Yeah,
that day
generally
when something
we're
happens.
gonna acknowledge it immediately. But I think Jen's example is a good one. Let's say the principal is at a conference or out sick or whatever the case may be, it gives us some flexibility.
I think what you have to be careful though, Kevin, is, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, let's say the complaint comes in on a Friday.
Yep.
You're saying 2 school days, that's now gonna become 4 days.
If it's Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah.
And all we're doing here is
Tuesday.
acknowledging
Yeah.
the complaint. We're not saying something happened, we're not saying someone's guilty of
Right.
something, we're
Right.
just acknowledging a
Right.
complaint. So 2 days to me seems like a lot of time to acknowledge that you
Yeah.
received a complaint.
Could you sort of combine the two concepts of, before it said immediately, but not use immediately, but, as soon as possible, but not to exceed 2 days or something like that? So that, you're,
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
I
that
think
makes
that's good,
sense.
yeah.
2 days might be as soon as possible, but in most cases, it's not going to be.
Right.
It's-
Mhm.
yeah. It's gonna be sooner.
And I can say generally, and again, you can't put a blanket on every individual situation, but I can say generally, if any faculty member receives kind of that kind of an allegation, they immediately go to the principal. If the principal is not available, they go to the assistant principal, and the kind of the machinery in the process kicks right in.
Yeah, So I think John's suggestion is a good one, that we would acknowledge it as soon as initially possible, but not to exceed.
Not to exceed
2
2
days.
days. Yeah.
2 school days.
Next paragraph, is everyone good with, okay. Next paragraph is Milford Public Schools is committed to providing employees and students, an environment. It says, this is again just scratching third parties. So this is really just, you know, committed to providing employees and students, an environment that's free of hostility. So it's, we have a responsibility obviously to all, but we're crossing out third parties, because if you look at it, it kind of gives, we're responsible ultimately for our students and employees. Third parties could be, hey, listen, I felt hostile because we lost the football game on Friday, and I think that was actually Jerry's example. Well, I felt hostile. They were booing when they scored. Okay. But intimidation. Well, I felt intimidated because, you know, I was the only you know, parent that came to watch my student play against the soccer team, and there was a whole bunch of Milford's parents there. He basically, that's why he's just recommending, just cover yourself, get rid of the third party. It's not, fundamentally, it's not really a big difference. It's just scratch the third party off of there. You good on that one? Go down, if you look, again, so we go to the top, first paragraph on the next page, again, it's the removal of the third parties, and that's a recurring theme. Third parties was kind of overwhelmingly throughout this. His recommendation was we take those out. Next paragraph down, becomes aware of possible, rather than possible, it just says becomes aware of. His recommendation was the word possible is an unneeded additive in there. It's really just becomes aware of a sex-based harassment report. Okay. We removed, going down to the bottom of that page, under the section that says, some examples of off-campus misconduct. We removed Facebook and replaced that with social media. Felt that was casted a wider net, given the fact that Facebook is only one particular one. We just used it to encompass all social media. We can't keep, our policy changes will not keep up with the pace of social media,
Yeah.
so, and the naming of things. Okay. Scrolling down, going to the next one. So if we are now on the next page here, we're under number 4. We have the second bullet point. This is under sexual harassment may include but is not limited to. It's a removal of the language comment on an individual's body. And my brain's starting to get a little cooked because it's getting a little late. Genuine adult.
I think you said that was too broad.
Yeah, I said it was too broad. Yeah, you're right.
It could preclude someone from giving a compliment or just
Right.
making an innocent,
As an
one-time
example.
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah.
It's a nice shoes you have on there. Oh, well.
Right.
That's exactly what it was. He felt it was too broad. Okay. Questions on that one? As we continue forward, go down the next couple of pages here. Now on the page that starts at the top with non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies, second paragraph down.
Which that's the next policy, Scott.
Oh, that is, I
Yeah.
apologize.
Yep.
Okay, so that's the end of that one. I apologize. Questions or concerns on that one? Other than the language that you brought up? Any other
Any
recommended
other questions
proposed
or
changes?
concerns? So earlier in the beginning, Scott, you mentioned how these policies were connected. That one was policy on sexual harassment, the other one was the procedures.
Yes. Next one is procedures.
So the next one. Now, the procedures are not only for sexual harassment; they cover a broader spectrum,
Correct.
right? So there are other policies that are connected to this
Yes,
procedure.
and that was the one that we didn't need to change because Jerry reviewed it and said you're covered, you're good.
So the other ones are okay. So we don't have to do anything with the others. So
Yep.
okay.
Yep. So the non-discrimination, anti-harassment, the procedures he felt needed updating, the policy itself did not.
Okay.
So it felt the policy was sound and still relevant, but the procedures, he did feel there were some small changes that need to be made.
Okay.
With the sexual harassment policy, he did feel that these changes need to be made to the policy.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we have a couple changes to make. Well, that one
Yeah.
change to make on that one. So then on this next one,
Yep.
there were also some red lines.
There are some red lines on this one, yep. So if we go to On the first page,
Okay,
that second.
before you jump in, Scott, if I
Yeah.
can just throw this out, these weren't based on previous Milford policies, this is some model language too, so these are changes to model language, as opposed to changes to current policies, but they reflect changes to the law and current practice. Does that make sense?
The sexual harassment one I thought was current policy.
The one that we kept was, because we
Yes.
didn't bring in the new one, the
Yeah.
first one was a new model policy.
On the non-discrimination, so anti-harassment.
Correct.
Yeah, so the one we're going through right now is based off of model language. This is not our current policy.
So the red lines are changes to the model language, not changes to current policy. I just want to make sure that's, it's a small distinction, but an important one.
So, so do we have a policy today?
On procedures, I don't believe we do.
Okay, so we don't have
This
procedures
is a
today.
this is a new procedure.
And do we have a non-discrimination, anti-harassment?
Yes, we have a policy.
Policy?
Yep, we have a policy but no procedure. So we have a policy that's what Jerry reviewed and said, you don't need to change your policy, but we need to get some
Correct.
language in place for for procedure.
Correct.
Here's the language for the procedure, it's model language,
Yeah.
and now we're redlining the adjustments for the model language. So what you're looking at is a completely newly introduced procedure.
And so when you were going through the procedures with Jerry, you had the policy
both.
with you as well, and
Yeah.
the two are aligned
Yep.
Correct.
with these changes? Okay.
Yes, he reviewed both of them at the same time.
Okay.
So, I don't know if the committee's had an opportunity to review all of this, but this is, because this is a brand new policy, the only redlining is just redlining for, to Kevin's point, redlining on the model language, and it's just we're sort of scratching out some specific pieces that are, coded out there. In the model language, it was, for some reason, we all felt it was a little odd, and I don't wanna speak for Jen and Jim, but, it was very interesting in the model language. It specifically called out one group, and that's the Boy Scouts of America. It actually didn't call out any other group except for the Boy Scouts of America. It was actually it was something that struck every single one of us as, well, there's so many different groups. What about the Girl Scouts? What about the Brownies? What about this? I mean, there's so many different groups out there. It struck us all as being odd. So what we did was, some of the language that's being removed that from the model language actually is just, it makes it more broad so that it's more encompassing of all groups, not just specific to the Boy Scouts. It's not that we're scratching out the Boy Scouts, it's that we want to encompass everybody. Okay. So that's really what the basis for that language change. I think that was the biggest, same thing. So if you look, the policy actually spells out each of these different pieces. So if you look here on the next page, same thing, we're scratching out Boy Scouts from the model language. And then it's really just a language cleanup as you kind of continue to go forward here. But without going through, because the whole thing is brand new, we'd have to read you guys the entire policy. After your review, are there any specific questions that came up as a result? It's really just those first couple pages that go through that you saw those red lines on.
I just go back to the previous comment about the timing, because I think that references 2 school days throughout
It is.
this procedure as well, so
Mhm.
maybe if we could tweak some of that language.
We can make it match.
Yeah, we'll
We can
match.
make the.
Yeah, and that was actually the intent on this one.
Yeah.
Yep, with the sexual harassment one was to match the language that was
Right.
proposed in this, so if we're gonna make that change on that other one, we can certainly make it match. Absolutely.
And this is probably for legal reasons, but there's a paragraph on page, they're not numbered here.
They're not numbered. Was it-
It's page 44 of the PDF of the packet, if that's any help. The first
What's the top
paragraph
of
says
the- yeah.
alleged perpetrator,
Okay.
which is facilitated by a school employee or by designated discrimination.
Yep, okay.
So that paragraph there, it says if the alleged victim or alleged perpetrator is a student under the age of 18, the facilitator will notify the student's parents or guardians. Do we have to have under the age of 18, or can we just say a student?
I'm guessing it's for legal purposes, because if they're
Mm.
over the age of
It's the age of
18, they
majority.
could be considered adult.
I would think
Um,
so. I would think so.
Yeah, they can be
So
emancipated.
I think it's probably just a legal designation, would be my interpretation of it.
But you know what, we can ask.
Hmm.
We'll ask Jerry.
we have some
Yeah.
19-year-old students that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, but yeah, we can certainly ask that. Yeah, we've got, by January, you got half the senior class is 18. It's terrifying. Yeah, we can certainly ask
that
Jerry.
question too.
Yeah, we can ask Jerry that question.
Okay.
Huh.
Any questions or comments on this policy? No? Okay.
So we'll make those adjustments and go forward with a second reading. Great. And that is, we have officially finished policies for tonight.
All right.
It's time to go home.
All right.
Now
We
the
got
fun.
four-
Now
we
the
got-
fun
we
begins.
got 4 hours of MCAS.
Exactly.
Bzzz, what happened to the projector? Oh.
No, this is.
It's a multi-computer PowerPoint presentation.
Do you want to jump down to subcommittee updates while Greg's setting up, and then we'll jump back to
Actually,
the
yeah,
podcast?
that's a great
Just
idea.
in the interest of time.
Yeah. All right, so policy
Policy
subcommittee,
side.
I think you've
Yep.
already covered.
Think we're done?
We've
enough
exhausted that
there,
time.
right? Although I did have one question on policy, sorry to keep bringing up questions. So I know one of the future agenda items, I think you brought it up at the last meeting, maybe the meeting before
Around
that.
communication.
Yeah, did you guys talk about that
We've-
policy level?
We haven't got to that part yet.
Okay,
We want to get, because of the timing of it, we want to get through, holiday.
okay.
All right, so I think Craig's ready to go. Are you good? Are you mic'd up?
Testing 1, 2. We're good. Alright, you're
All
gonna
right,
start?
so I'm actually starting it. So when we looked at our MCAS data, we kind of set up 4 questions and set the presentation up. We want to give you guys information on what is MCAS 2.0, because we're in the 3rd version of testing in 4 years. We had the legacy MCAS, which is actually still taking place at the high school. We had the PARCC exam, and now MCAS 2.0. So there's a lot of confusion out there, I believe, across the Commonwealth. And I want to clarify kind of what MCAS 2.0 is and what the testing process has been. The second question we want to answer is, how did students in Milford perform? The third question is, what does the data tell us? And the fourth question is kind of, what are we still wondering about, or what questions are we still asking as kind of as we move forward into this new kind of realm or round of testing? So if you want to go to the next slide. So the testing format, we went this past year computer-based MCAS 2.0 in grades 3, 4, 5, and 8. And the reason we did that is because obviously Woodland had the devices on the ground last year. And 8th grade had enough devices, and the DESE recommended that you piloted it on a computer-based format in 8th grade during the 16-17 school year. It was paper and pencil in 6 and 7, and at the high school level, which was still the legacy MCAS, as well as all the science exams were paper and pencil as well. In 17-18, we're going computer-based in grades 3 through 8, and we're still in the legacy MCAS for the high school. And then in 2018 and 19, which is next school year, it goes computer-based basically across the board, and the new MCAS 2.0 at the high school level is going to be introduced. And that particular piece is important because there's a graduation requirement connected to it, and we're really still waiting for a lot of information from the DESE in terms of, you know, how that's going to look. And I'm going to talk about how the standards have changed as well. And we're kind of in a wait and see mode right now to see kind of how that plays out for the high school for the high school graduation requirement. So if you want to go to the next slide.
I think I see.
So the next generation MCAS, or the MCAS 2.0, is an updated version of the 20-year-old MCAS, nearly 20-year-old MCAS. It's, I think, similar to the PARCC in a lot of ways. There's a focus on critical thinking ability, application of knowledge, and connections between reading and writing. It's supposed to give a clearer readiness for the next grade or level of college and career. We're still waiting to see, and I think it's going to take a few years to really get a sense of that, of how clearly this is kind of connected to the next grade's readiness. It's designed to be given on a computer, and we'll be moving completely to the computer base, as I said, next year. And the first version of this was given this past spring. So you want to go to the next slide? this just gives you the data on what percentage of kids took the testing. It's kind of interesting. 60% of all grades in 3 through 8 took the test on computers, 93% in grades 4 and 8. Again, I did the timeline, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this one. So let's shift to the
Just
next
to be
one.
clear,
Oh, sure.
this is all Milford data? Or
No,
is
this is statewide data. This
statewide?
one's
Okay.
state.
I
Yeah,
just
so
wanna, for those that may be watching at home,
Yeah, yeah,
it's,
no,
it's
it's a
not
good-
about us, it's about those that may
it's
be
a-
watching at
it's a
home. I
good
just wanna make
question.
sure we clarify.
And again, these slides are taken directly from a DESE presentation that we incorporated into the packet, but I wanted to give you kind of the highlights of that, because there's a lot of information in there. So people were comfortable with the 4 categories of achievement level: advanced, proficient, needs improvement, and warning. It's shifting to different achievement levels. And the thing that's critical, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it tonight, and neither is Craig, but the percentages of students statewide who are either falling into the new categories of exceeding expectations or meeting expectations is pretty much hitting 50% across the state as an average. And prior, and this, I'm going to try to explain this quickly and simply, but prior to this year, there were different cut scores by grade level, meaning like a different score in 4th grade was proficient versus 7th grade. The high school cut scores were different from the 8th grade cut scores. So now the cut scores are pretty similar, and the data is more in line with the NAEP scores, where about 50% of the students taking it fall into those kind of proficient and advanced categories, which we're calling exceeding expectations and meeting expectations right now. It's partially meeting expectations and not meeting expectations have replaced needs improvement and warning. Maybe shift it to the next one. So this is going to be what's going to cause, and not only in Milford but across the state, the question that's going to cause the most consternation is going to come up, I think, to Jen and educators across Massachusetts, is why did my child score proficient on the older MCAS but only partially meeting expectations this year? I've been kind of selling MCAS 2.0 as PARC with a different label, which I think in some cases is true. The big difference, though, is the PARC scores were set up on a kind of a national cut score setup. So the threshold to get to, and PARC was set up in 5 categories, but the top 2 categories in PARC was a lot lower bar to jump over than the new MCAS bar is. So the expectations in terms of what level you fall into have raised dramatically. And I think it's going to cause, parents and students across the state, I think, a lot of anxiety, confusion, worry that they're, not ready. The fact that they fall into a different category this year doesn't necessarily mean they know any more or less than they did the previous year. It's just we're just under a different testing kind of regime. And I'm going to figure out a better way to message that to people, but it's going to be hard for some people to take, where your child from say you've got a 7th grader, from grades 3 through 6 they were solidly in the proficient range. Suddenly in grade 7 they're in the
Meeting.
partially meeting expectations. And I'm still getting used to the vocabulary. The partially meeting expectations. This is the baseline testing year too, and I want to emphasize to everybody that everybody across the state is collecting data for the first time, and if your child falls into a particular category that they weren't in previously, it's not time to hit the panic button. It's going to take a few years, probably 3 to 5 years, to really kind of, you want to jump in?
No, well, the term that the state used over and over again when we were on conference call with them is pause and reset. So basically this year is a pause, and everything that comes after this is reset now. So when we make comparisons from one test to another, we're comparing, say, this year's data to this year's test. The tests we take in the spring to the results we're getting now versus, and you'll see, we're not exactly, and the state wasn't clear on how they made growth score comparisons from one test to another, because there was so many different tests or so many different combinations that kids could do. You had kids on computer, kids not on computer, kids that took PARC, kids that took PARC on computers, kids that took the legacy MCAS last year. So there's so many different combinations, but they still came up with growth scores. How? I don't know. So.
And that's part of the reason why they're not giving any accountability levels, except for districts that were in the level 4 and 5 categories, because it's a completely new testing environment, and the expectations are completely different than they have been in the past.
You on a different slide? You on 9?
I think we kind of hit these. Yeah, so let's go to the data.
All right, so in your packet, you have all the data that you need or want. I'm not going to go through it all. I'm not going to go through it all today. You have all the subgroup data, all by grade, by school. But these are overall results. Okay, so they're aggregate scores. They're not broken out by subgroups. But again, you have all that data in front of you. So the top row, math, is the state. That's where the state as an aggregate fell for grades 3 to 8. This is where we fell, right below it. So in math, we're a little below where the state is. In language arts, we're just about there for grades 3 to 8, give or take a % or 2. Okay?
So I just want to make sure, I'm reading this correctly. So what this says, so in the exceeds expectation, in math, state's saying 8% of students are getting exceeds, and we have 4%, so we're roughly half that percentage. And we've got 36% of our students are in the meets category, as opposed to the state average is 40%.
Correct.
Okay, that's where you're getting your 50 from, right? So we're at 40%, they're at 50%, so we're about
48.
40 and 48, so it's an 8-point swing.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And then for our ELA population, so I know there's been some changes to ELA as far as.
Before you jump in there, Scott, do you mind if I just jump in to make one more point to the specific of the data? If you look at the not meeting expectations column, we're actually 1 point better than the state there. So we're gonna really look at the data to see like the continuum of where the kids are falling in the partially meeting expectations, because we're kind of in line at the not meeting. Where I think we're off is really the middle section. You know, and how close are we there is what we're really starting to look at, and we haven't dug that deep into it yet.
Yeah, I'm looking at it going, so we're, on the exceeds, we're roughly half of what the state average is. On the meets, and this is for the non-ELA, is that, no?
This is strictly math across the board.
Just math, this includes ELA scores, or this?
Which
is-
one are you looking
No,
at?
so the ELA, so once you
Sorry,
go to the ELA, and then.
This is the state math score, and this is Milford. This is the state language arts score, Milford. Okay?
Yep, got it. So and I'm sorry, I was thinking ELL, I apologize. That's where I was getting confused. I was like, wait a second. So for math ELL, we're roughly half of what the state
For
percentage
just
is.
math, just math.
Yep, just math.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
You said math ELL.
Did I?
It's getting late.
It's getting late,
I need another
baby.
cookie. All right, so for math, we're at roughly half for the exceeds. We're at 36 versus 40, so we're in the ballpark with math in the meets. What it looks like is that where we fell short of the state averages in exceeds and meets is really those students are now in partial.
Correct.
But for the difference of 1 percentage point, you know, it's basically the same. I mean, again, it's 11 versus 12 in the
Yep.
does not meets.
Yeah.
And I would say, and then when we look at ELA, so for language, again, same thing for the exceeds, a little better. We actually did better in the meets category. We're exactly the same as the state for partial, and we're a little behind that 1 percentage point we picked up for not meets in math. We dropped in English. It looks like it's our to your point, Kevin, it's that partially meeting seems to be where we're kind of going over a little bit. Where we
Yep.
get a little bit where
Yeah,
the
and so-
population- certainly in math anyways.
And that's what we're digging
ELA
into.
is exactly
Yeah.
the same.
So we're
We'll
right
tell
at
you
the
what we're
state.
doing with that, I guess.
Yeah,
Hopefully it
we're
becomes
addressing
clear.
it, but we're right with the state with ELA from 3 through 8 is basically like if you were to put it in one sentence, and we're trailing the state around the top 2 categories in mathematics.
Science scores. I believe if you look at it, we're actually in 5th and 8th grade science doing a little better than the state average in
Yep.
science. High school results, again, just keep in mind, high school is using legacy tests. 8th grade and through 3rd grade was using the new MCAS. So these are the scores, and I'll show you a comparison to last year, because at the legacy MCAS, you can kind of see a comparison from year to year. Any questions about the scores?
So can I throw one thing out there, Craig?
Yep.
Is, for math, we're trailing the state by about 3 points in the advanced and proficient category. But the critical category is the warning percentage, because those are the kids that don't actually pass the MCAS and have to retake it. And we're actually 2 points better than the state there, so a smaller percentage of our students are failing, but a slightly smaller percentage of our students are also falling in that advanced and proficient category. And for ELA, we're, I think, slightly above the state
For
for
Yeah.
advanced and proficient.
Yep.
And then we only had 1% of our students that were, that fell into that warning category.
It's actually below
Which
1.
is the best number I think we've ever had.
It's good.
It's less than 1%, actually.
It looks like math is the area where we
Yes.
seem to be struggling.
And you're probably gonna get into this at some point, either Craig, either you or Kevin, but the big factor is the underlying demographics, right? And when you compare our demographics to the state, we have a higher percentage of the ELL students, a higher percentage of high needs students, and they
Correct.
tend not to score as well in these standardized tests, which is gonna bring down some of our
Correct.
scores, right?
Correct.
Well, I don't know where to go with this, because
It was a tough question. It's a
well, how I
complex
feel
question.
about MCAS, you know, and it's, I'm not alone in this. It's really a question of exactly what you're saying. I guess the best way for me to say it is, if you took the MCAS and lined them up from best to worst, right? Best performing to worst performing, and then right next to it, you took the districts and lined them up from the wealthiest to the least
Right.
wealthiest, it's going to be really, there's going to be a comparison there. That's going to be similar, right?
These tests do a great job of measuring how affluent a community is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, MCAS to me is a small picture of how well a district is doing at educating students.
Very small.
And unfortunately, in the media, in the court of public opinion, there's a value there that they have that it really doesn't do any justice to what happens every single day. For example, this I don't know if you guys remember, but a few short hours ago, we had a nice choral ensemble up here singing to us.
They weren't short, baby.
But
Yeah.
that will never be measured on an MCAS, right? In the current system. I'm hoping that sometime in the future, we could have a performance task system where those kinds of things are measured. And that's actually, not to spoil the ending here, but as we're going into our understanding by design and designing units that way, that's kind of what we're looking at, is performance tasks, things that we value. We value in things that the private sector values, or career readiness values, you know, public speaking, collaborating with your peers, being trustworthy, those kinds of things. They're certainly not measured on an MCAS at all. So how do we, that's one of the things we wonder is, how do we take these results, put them into, make suggestions to classroom teachers and still be able to do those kinds of things that we also value. So, I don't know, it's something we have to consider, I guess. All right, so our 3-year comparison, if you remember last year, we really focused on growth, and our growth scores last year we weren't exactly happy with, and as you can see, there was some large improvements with our growth scores. So we were really pleased with that. I thought that the high school did a really good job this year in their improvements, so I was pleased with the improvements. And, you know, so were the high school teachers, so good.
And Craig,
Yep.
along those lines, sorry, I don't mean to drag all this up.
That's
but,
okay.
Last year when we saw those math scores, district took some steps to try and correct that, right? There's some interventions that were put
Yep.
in place.
Yep.
Some new programs that were put in place, completely redid the curriculum at the middle school
Yep.
level.
We have some slides on that,
Perfect.
okay?
It's a
all
beautiful
right.
preview.
Okay.
It's okay. So 10 essential questions. When we took a look at these scores and we started to dig into some of the data that we got, we came up with some questions. And I alluded to some of that already. But I think one of the biggest things, and Scott, you mentioned it, was math, right? And we recognize that in math, there's really a pretty significant drop-off in the amount of time for time on learning in math in grades 4 and under versus grades 5 and up. So we go from, say, 90 minutes, 75 to 90 minutes in kindergarten, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then once they get into, students get into 5th grade, they drop down to 42 minutes. And then we expect them to use this program, Everyday Math, that needs 60 minutes for a class to run. And it's an impossible feat, especially if we are asking teachers to just use Everyday Math with fidelity, the way it's supposed to be used. It's not, you just can't do it, it's impossible. So that's one of our biggest things, is how is this time on math instruction that we have, this model that we have, how is it affecting the scores?
So Craig, I'm gonna interrupt you for just 1 second. So, so that's been my, and I'll be honest with you, it's been my biggest concern and one of the reasons why I am such a non-supporter of Everyday Math, is exactly what you just said. It's a 60-minute program that we're trying to cram into 42 minutes.
Yeah.
The minute the instructor came out, when we first introduced, for the benefit of the public that's watching and the members that weren't here for it, when it was first introduced in the district years ago, the instructor that came out to do the professional development and introduce Everyday Math said, well, when we're doing math for 60 minutes, and one of the teachers raised their hand and says, but our period's only 42, the instructor said, this program won't work here then. That was 15 years ago?
Well,
Maybe longer. But, so hopefully I'm hoping that, because we've been talking about this since before you were in this role.
No,
Patrick was
but-
talking about it for 3 years before I was on the board. I'm hopeful that you're going to be able to give us a response to answer that question of, how do we fix that?
It's a good question. You know, and you know, honestly, as a principal at Woodland, I knew we had the time, and I knew we could use the program with fidelity. However, we lose something when you do that. You lose the teacher autonomy. You lose teachers getting excited about a program. So we're willing to work with teachers and have some flexibility with the program. And I also think that teachers get confused sometimes, and it's messaging from administrators too, that the program equals the curriculum, and it doesn't. And I think sometimes we get stuck on that, when teachers could really be creative with different projects and really get kids excited about learning, instead of just sticking worksheets in front of them and doing really project-based performance task assessments, what we talked about earlier. So that was question 1. But how do we increase task rigor in all content areas? Not just tell me what I just said, but how does it apply to real world applications? What can you do with the information that I just gave you? What opportunities do we have for inclusive practices? Not only are we using inclusion, but is it true inclusion? Is it true inclusive practices? Do we have inclusion rooms that have maybe special ed students in it or EL students in it, but they're off in a different section of the class while the rest of the class is learning something else? I would call that an inclusion room. I wouldn't call it inclusive practices. So it's very important that if we are talking about inclusion, that everybody is included in whatever we're learning about. So looking at that, what additional supports can we implement for struggling learners at the secondary level, aside from pullout? Too often I see students pulled out for this, that, or the other thing. We're trying to remediate them. The only problem with that is when we're just worried about remediation, they're falling further and further behind their peers because they're never getting that instruction either. So we have to figure out ways to get struggling students the help that they need while they're still getting the curriculum at the same time, so it's a parallel program. How do we support teachers in the area of data analysis? Truthfully, as a building level administrator, we didn't do a good job with this. I think we could do a better job. We could get some coaches in here. We could get some data analysis. We could get, just teachers talking about data and try to change the perception of the data too, and how it could be useful in their classroom rather than it's a blame game and everyone's out to get you. It's very difficult, obviously, because you're talking about the kids that are in front of them, but we need to get better at that. We need to use data better. How are we measuring the effectiveness of our programs and curriculum? If we're just using MCAS to do that, that's not right. We need to figure out different ways. We need to figure out, like we said, the performance assessments that we use and we're trying to build. How can we get those in the public eye? How can we use those to determine whether or not students are making progress? What supports are in place for teachers in the area of planning and instruction? We are doing some professional development around understanding by design, which we'll talk about at some point in a later meeting. So there's one thing. How does access have an impact on achievement? Are all kids able to access all of our programs? Advanced placement, for example. How many of our kids can access advanced placement? Question we have. What initiatives are priorities at each school and how do they affect achievement? So last week or the week before, we ran through an initiative inventory with all of the curriculum leaders, and they listed all of the initiatives that were in the schools. And the lists were anywhere from 20 or 30 something to 80 something. I mean, we had a wide range of just different initiatives that teachers think that are going. So what we're going to do with those next is prioritize them and say, what's helping and what's not? And let's take some of this off the plates of the teachers. And then how are we increasing the collective capacity of our educators? How are we working together to help all of our students? That's what that question means. All right. So as you can see, we had a lot of questions. All right. Just a few things that we are doing already. And this is just district-wide. We are exploring the additional time for math and different models of support and opportunities for learning. We are increasing the rigor and engagement. We're providing professional development and understanding by design. We do have teams of teachers already that are talking about performance tasks and essential questions and all the different pieces of understanding by design. We're piloting some literacy coaches and data analysis at Brookside Memorial and see how that goes. We're developing a cohesive and comprehensive curriculum map to make sure we're not missing any of the standards. We're expanding opportunities for enrichment and intervention, implementing Project Lead the Way in grades 3 to 8. And new this year, we're providing support to second-year teachers through the mentoring program, and that'll continue next year with third-year teachers. Specifically at Milford High School, they were working with this Writing with Colors initiative that we talked about a little bit. Just a different way of coding for students. So that's expanded. There's some Perkins funds out there to support some math tutoring supports. Studying the effects of the pull-out service program. I talked about that a little earlier. Currently, they're looking at Project Lead the Way. Project Lead the Way in the high school level will provide transcripted college credits for the students if they take that. There's a biomed field, and then there's a STEM field and computer science field. So we're looking at those different options for students. And one of the things, and we're looking at grant opportunities for that. But one of the things is access to everyone. So as long as all students have access to it, that's what can help us with that. And one of the very interesting data points that Josh pointed out was our math scores there were students that participated in was it after school?
No,
Or
it was
was
during
it
the
during
school day.
school?
It was a course
So
during the school day.
It was a course during the school day to help the students that failed in 8th grade, I think, right?
Where needs improvement or warning.
Pass the MCAS, and all of those students that took that course ended up passing the MCAS and improved. So we're looking to expand that. Now again, the problem with that is when you go into a program like that, you're coming out of something else. So there's a give and take there, and again, what's the value for where that student needs to be? Is the student better served in our schools to be learning music or doing better in math? I don't know. I think that needs to be a case-by-case decision, and I think if there's other ways around it, maybe outside of school, I think those options should be left open.
Can I throw one more thing out there, Craig?
Go for it.
When Josh Otland, the principal of the high school, was doing the data analysis, what he saw is a direct correlation between student success on the MCAS and students taking these courses that were kind of, backfilling in skills that they were, missing or struggling with. Some students, for a variety of reasons, and Craig was kind of speaking to this, elected not to take the course. The students that took the course showed, significantly more improvement than those that didn't, which is intuitive. But we do want to expand that program from the perspective of, at the high school level especially, the 10th grade MCAS is a graduation requirement.
All right, so Stacy this year is restructuring their math intervention program, where in the past it was kind of a pull-out program, and now the program is more of a push-in, so the students are staying within the class and the teachers are co-teaching and pulling aside in the class for Tier 2 instruction rather than pulling them out and having the students miss that Tier 1 instruction. They've aligned the reading intervention curriculum to reading in language arts. They've implemented Project Lead the Way. This is the second year, somebody I think mentioned this, second year of implementation of the new math program at Stacy, which aligns to the high school's math program. And the greater use of the ALEX program, which is a computer-based conceptual understanding program based on the new math program.
I think, Craig, you mentioned that, actually go back to that previous
Sure.
slide, sorry.
It's all right.
Both the high school level and Stacy, you talked about intervention. So
Yep.
the intervention is just focused on the kids that didn't meet expectations,
Well,
right? Or is it focused on?
it's a tough question. What it's supposed to do is every 6 weeks there's an assessment. You look at how the kids did, and whatever kids didn't perform well, you reteach that whatever that skill is, and then you assess them again. And kids that still don't understand it, you give them more of what they need. Kids that do understand it now go back into the regular class, and it goes from there.
So it's not based on their scores on MCAS.
Not
it's
necessarily.
Based on the math class that they're taking at that given time and how they're performing in that class.
Correct.
So a student that's in a college prep algebra class
Mm-hmm.
could be receiving some sort of an intervention.
They could be.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so that could help get a child or a student from meeting expectations to exceeding expectations potentially.
It could.
On the MCAS.
Now, I would think, obviously, not obviously, I'm sorry. But at Stacy, when we're talking about intervention teachers, we're also talking about Title I funds. So the Title I funds that usually fund those positions go to the neediest students. So I would think, unfortunately, we don't have all the resources for all the classes for that to happen. So we ask teachers to be able to do those kind of interventions, not just somebody else coming in and providing those interventions. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So most of the interventions with intervention teachers are on the lower end rather than on the higher end of a kid that needs to go from, it's tough to correlate between like an MCAS. You know what I mean?
And I guess the point I'm trying to make is, are we challenging every student to be able to take that next step, or are we only challenging the kids that are underperforming?
Yeah. That's a good question.
So,
Yeah.
do you mind if I jump in there?
Go ahead.
I would say that the fact that the courses are differentiated at the middle school, you're seeing a lot of students really challenged, because the students we're seeing a higher percentage of students jump into algebra in 8th grade, for example. So I think we're pushing the high end in a different way than we're supporting students that are struggling. If that makes sense, 'cause we're the whole point of the restructure with two real points. One was to align it to the high school curriculum. The second point was to push more students into more rigorous courses sooner, so they were ready to access and have a pathway to, like, say, an AP Calculus course if that was the path they wanted to go on.
Okay. Sorry. And then finally, Woodland. Okay. So, ST Math is underway, and they're getting reports now on how that's going. I think the reports come weekly to the teachers, and Chris Sang. They're right now looking at scheduling options to increase the time on learning for 5th grade math. And I think 3rd grade, 4th grade is all set in terms of the amount of math that they're getting at that level. Comes out to about 84 minutes, I think, at 4 days a week. Explore scheduling options to increase time. Analyze MCAS data for trends. So they're all of the data that we've given you, but down to classroom data and also standards. I don't think we gave you the standards data on how each kid did on particular standards, but all of that has been distributed to teachers. And like I said before, we're asking teachers to analyze that data, and they're certainly not experts at it. And it's not easy, again, to kind of you're exposing how you did basically to your colleagues, and that's not easy to do. And we're asking them to do that, but I think it takes time and it takes trust, certainly. But they're looking at subgroup performance and looking at trends there, and looking to see what the deal is with inclusion versus inclusive practices, like we talked about earlier. They have made an increased focus on student attendance, and if you have students that go to Woodland, Tim does a good job of relaying that information back to parents, and it's having a remarkable effect. Their attendance is way up, which is very important. If we want to see scores go up, kids need to be in school in order for that to happen. Increasing the opportunity for co-teach with reading specialists. So again, they're doing kind of the same thing that Stacy's doing, is rather than pulling students out, reading intervention teachers are going into classrooms and doing more co-teaching than pull out. And developing math units that are focused on performance tasks. 5th grade was a perfect example of that. Like you said, we saw some great things happening in 5th grade where they were doing performance tasks that were tied to, they were along the same lines as everyday math, but veered off enough that it was more conceptual rather than just worksheets. And I think that's it. Questions?
Does anyone have any questions?
So if I may, I think, Craig, thanks and Kevin for putting this together. I think those are 10 very important questions.
Mhm.
The 10 essential questions. I think I think you addressed sort of at a school by school, sort of what are some of the things that are going on to help address a lot of those questions. I think having that really being sort of a guiding principle as you continue to move forward with this is going to be really critical. And I think continuing to revisit those 10 essential questions of, all right, so these are the questions we're asking ourselves. How did we do? What's important to Milford? How do we do versus the state? And the 4 questions, and then those 10 essential, continuing to revisit those on an ongoing basis so that we can say, all right, let's ask ourselves these questions again. Here's what we've made for changes, and this goes back to what we started talking about back in the spring when the principals were here giving their improvement plans. What's going to be different? How are we going to know it's getting better? I think those questions start to ask that, and now it's going to be a question of, what are both the qualitative as well as quantitative measurements that you're gonna have to help answer those questions as you go forward. Because there's a lot of great plans that are on there, and you've seen some of both of them. I think continuing to highlight those more and more is gonna help create some clarity around this as we go forward.
I agree, and I think another conversation that needs to happen is, what do we value in our schools?
Yep.
And how are we gonna measure whatever it is that we're valuing? We certainly value math and language arts, right?
Yep.
But there are so many other things that we value, and how are we measuring that? And how are we making sure that people understand that there are so many other great things that we do in a school that determine whether or not we have a great district, or your own son or daughter has a great education.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we get judged by a test on one day,
Yep.
and it's just not fair.
And that's a challenge we all face, right?
Yep.
So, and we've been talking about that now for, probably the last 2 or 3 years, and it's absolutely a big part of the marketing push. And so I know we've had some discussions about that in the marketing subcommittee and with ClearGov, and putting some messaging around these scores once we go live with ClearGov. But that's a very important piece, because people look at these numbers and they jump to conclusions and they make assumptions that aren't necessarily accurate, because there's so many other measures that we take into consideration.
And one of the greatest metrics that we have is the college matriculation numbers. Because our numbers for the MCAS, historically have been kind of right around the state average. A couple areas are a little below, a couple areas a little above.
Right.
But with the college, 4-year and 2-year college admissions numbers, we're consistently above the state average, and that's why we're doing, just from a marketing perspective, we take the pictures with the kids as they're accepted to schools, but we're seeing our kids get into the most competitive colleges and universities, and we're seeing more of our students have access to higher education than the state. And to put that in context, and I know for you guys I'm kind of a broken record, but like Massachusetts is the most competitive, the most successful educational state in the country, and probably one of the best educational systems in the world. Craig and I were at a conference today, and there's a guy, his name is Bill Daggett, and I've seen him a couple times before, and I think Craig has too. But his message is that America has the best education system in the world. The only people that don't know that are Americans. And part of the reason is we educate everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who walks through the door we educate, and that's not true with the rest of the world. And access and equity is expensive, and we really have to kind of focus on we have to look at the scores, because we always want to do better. There's no question about it. We always want to be better than we were the day before. But we also want to look at the long game, and what are we doing, and what are we preparing kids for? And we want to try to develop, and I'm in conversations with the high school team, of pathways that are going to lead kids to successful destinations, whatever that may be. And it's going to mean different things for different kids, because we have, we bring 20 different kids in here, and we've seen cheerleaders, athletes, singers, dancers, and we have all these kids with all these interests, and we want to get them to where they need to go. And and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And I think that's what Craig was speaking to as well, is test scores for the MCAS and SATs or other measures that are kind of public are one measure, but there's a lot of different things going on, and a lot of different ways that we're supporting students for success. And we want to continue to do those things and not lose it by chasing test scores. We want the scores to be better. I don't want to, I don't want to send that message that we don't want the scores to. We always want the scores to be better, but we don't want to chase the scores to the detriment of all these other things that make the Milford Public Schools great.
And you touched on it. Obviously, there's still room for improvement.
Always room
and
for
that's what
improvement.
led to those questions that Craig
Yeah.
threw up on the board. So, as you go through this process and answering those questions, that's going to inform the strategic plan. It's going to inform the
Absolutely.
budget process that we're going into.
Absolutely.
It's going to inform the negotiations that we're going to go into with teachers, because professional development's a big piece of that, and you touched on that as well.
the picture of where we need to go becomes clearer every day in terms of like what we want to see, you know, the student experience to be. We want students who are engaged, excited to be here, and preparing them for whatever that next step is. And there's a diversity of needs and wants from the students and the families that we serve.
Yeah.
And we want to meet as many of those needs as we possibly can to get
So-
into that next step.
So I think those are, you know, to that point, I think those are great aspirational goals to have. I think we need to also support that, and I think this was a good step towards beginning that path. I think part of our narrative, though, needs to be far more tactical in what do we want, right? So what do we want to stand for? What are our priorities? And what do we want our kids to graduate Milford High School with? And I think the aspirational components you just talked about are really critical. I really do. I think that's important. But I think it's equally as important to have the tactical results as well. Yes, graduation rate's really important, and it is. You know, what's the graduation rate? What's the acceptance rate? I had an opportunity at dinner with a student from Milford last night that was just committed to being to a Division I school for track. I mean, it's incredible. We have Division I athletes graduating. Less than 1% of athletes across the country get Division I, get accepted to a Division I sports program. I
We've
had dinner
been
with one
consistently
last
much
night.
higher than that the last
Yeah, and
few
we're
years.
way above that. So it's being able to tell that story, but I think there's some of these results as we look forward here, and I'm hoping that we're coming up on getting those, is the quantitative and qualitative components as well, to support the aspirational component of
Yep.
it. It's that we get this if we do that.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Mike?
I just want to speak a little bit, and I've said this before to Craig's point, and I don't want to make light that MCAS isn't important, but to me, MCAS is about that much of the educational process in Milford. And, you know, to Kevin's point, I think you need to look at the graduation rate. I need to look at the schools that they're going to. We sit there at senior night and we see the pictures and the schools that they're going to up on the wall. I mean, you know, this year, if I'm not mistaken, we had one off to Yale, one off to Harvard, and both were, if I'm not mistaken, ELL students when they first.
One was originally an EL student, and we had a Princeton too this past year.
You know what I say? Great job. I say great job to the educators. But what I think is also very important is, and I use terminology, when you get out on the sidewalk of life, what kind of person are you? You know, where are you in society? You know, what are you doing to help people? You know, and I think you get, that's all part of the educational process. And I think when people look at our MCAS scores and they criticize this, I'm gonna go back to what I've said since the day I sat in this chair. If you criticize the Milford Public Schools, you've never been in the Milford Public Schools. And if you weren't blown away by that chorus tonight,
They're awesome.
again, to Craig's point, it's the chorus. It is the academics. It is the curriculum. It is the sports. It is the after-school programs. You got to look at everything because you're educating the whole child. And you know, before you become judgmental on a very, very small part of the educational process, you got to look at the whole educational process. And I think in this district, with the diversity that we have in this community, and I love this community, but the diversity we have in this district, I think our faculty, I think our administrators, I think everybody in the district does a great, great job getting our students ready to go on to the next step.
Craig, one of the common theme in your presentation when you're going through each of the schools was time on learning. And obviously we have only a fixed amount of time during the day. So I'll be curious to see what direction you go in there and how we expand on that time on learning, in particular with math.
Yep.
And so today, we still use everyday math, the lower levels, but we made a change
At the
stays,
sixth grade.
right?
Yep.
So are we looking at that as well to create some continuity to maybe go with one consistent, or are we comfortable with the fact that we have two?
Yeah, the programs kind of shift when you get to the secondary level, as opposed to there's usually a K-5 or K-6 program and then like a middle and high school program.
It's the same publishing company.
There's
And
literally 3 left.
I'm reluctant to make any change to a program because I don't think it's a program. I think if whatever program we bring in, we're gonna have the same issue, because it's not about a program, you know, it's about what are we teaching our students? What skills are we giving them, and are we providing teachers with the resources and tools they need to have our students be, I guess, what are you looking for with math? To me, it's financial literacy. Are they able to use their checkbook? I don't know, you know, that kind of thing. You know, I keep hearing algebra and advanced math, but I don't know the last time I used a quadratic equation.
Yeah.
That's a great
But I
point.
could balance my checkbook every day when I'm writing bills, so.
Well, at Stacy in particular, are we looking, in order to expand time on learning, are we looking at things like the academic enrichment period, and maybe using that time in a different way?
They're even looking at using that time differently this year.
Okay.
Yeah, and, you know, the tough thing, we've run into this problem before, where we have this block of time, and we have 15 teachers with students in front of them, but they're not all math teachers.
Right.
So, how do you use that time effectively? You know, there are districts out there. There are some districts. We visited one, Bridgewater Raynham, who has ST math like we do. They have everyday math like we do, and they're outperforming us. But they have things in place, like they have a special subject, for example, that's a math class. So, essentially, kids take 6th grade math, 7th grade math, and 8th grade math, but in there's a special subject which equates to over another year's worth of math classes. So the kids are taking their 3 years of math, but then additionally they have at least a year, I think it was a year and a half of math that our kids just don't have. So things like that, there's ways to do it, but again, with additions comes subtraction, so we have to give up something if that's what we're looking at. I don't know.
And I think that's a great point that you just made, Craig, because it's about sacrifices. We can't do everything. We can't. We'd love to, but there's only so many minutes in the day. There's only so many classrooms we have. And I think that's really where, as a school committee member, I look to you and to Kevin as what are those trade-offs that you are going to give us advice on, because at the end of the day, it's our direction from funding, right? That's then the policies and the processes that we create as well. But really, in giving that very clear direction of, hey, here are the trade-offs that we're going to make. We're going to be willing to let this go. We're not thrilled about it, but we're going to be willing to let this go because we believe it's a sacrifice we're willing to make to be able to do this. And giving that level of clarity, I think, is going to be really critical.
All right. Any other questions, comments? No. All right. So Kathy, report Assistant Superintendent.
I have for the committee's approval this evening 6 warrants, and the first warrant is in the amount of $320,803.01.
We have a motion from Jim, seconded by Mike. All in favor?
Next warrant is $27,614.09.
Motion from Scott, seconded by John. All in favor?
The next warrant is in the amount of $23,806.93.
Motion from Jen, seconded by Mike. All in favor?
The fourth warrant is in the amount of $2,699.95.
Motion from Jim, seconded by Jen. All in favor?
The next warrant is in the amount of $5,169.55.
Motion from John, seconded by Mike. All in favor?
And the last warrant is in the amount of $317,211.34.
Motion from Jim, seconded by Jen. All in favor?
The committee also has a course reimbursement request this evening in the amount of $7,265.
We have a motion from Jen, seconded by Jim. All in favor?
And there is also a list of the latest appointments from our previous meeting. No vote is required. And that's it for this evening.
Thanks, Kathy. All right, so we've covered policy subcommittee, budget subcommittee. Do we have any update on budget?
Yeah, I guess we have an update. We met a week ago this past Monday. We started off, we talked about the two town meeting articles, which both passed on Monday evening. We got the approval for up to $60,000 in capital from the from capital for use on the Woodland School Memorial School back playground, which is in conjunction with the PTO fundraising to replace the back playground. And then we got the funding to go forward with the one-to-one Chromebook initiatives and provide Chromebooks for grades 10 through 12. So that was a big achievement, I guess, on town meeting floor, which was very much appreciated. We started the budget season discussions. I guess it's gone out now. We're going to meet again the first Saturday in January, 9 a.m. here. We discussed having the requests and the substantiations given to us a little further in advance, ideally at least a week before, so we can review them individually before we meet collectively. And we also started discussing the fact that we're going to be entering negotiations again with the teachers union, and we're looking at what the impacts will be for steps and lane changes in terms of the budget, and Kathy's going to start compiling that information to give to us at a future meeting.
Okay.
Did I miss anything, Jen?
No, you did a good job.
The finance committee has done their appointment, so Mike Schiavi is going to be the chair of the education subcommittee for FinCom. So would you guys mind just reaching out to Mike and scheduling an initial meeting with that group so that we can start having some conversations with them and setting expectations as we get into budget season?
I can have Melissa make that reach and schedule that meeting.
Yeah,
that works.
Do you, for clarity's sake, Mr. Chairman, meeting with the full committee or meeting with the subcommittee?
You guys meet with subcommittee
Okay.
to start.
That's what I
Yeah.
just want to confirm. Okay. Sub to sub.
Eventually we'll all get together, but
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I just want you
No
guys to start
question.
having some
Promise?
conversations.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. And Jim, you want to give an update on the marketing and communications?
Actually, I didn't attend the last one, so.
So I can give an update on
Yeah,
an
check
event we
people.
just had, if that works for everybody. This past Friday, the high school presented to Stacy Middle School and did a fantastic job. Our band performed, our cheerleaders performed, and a number of our departments presented some of the opportunities that were available at Milford High School, and I think it was very well received. They did the presentation both to the 7th and 8th graders. Principal Otland and his team did, I think, an awesome job overall. I don't know if anybody wants to comment if they had. I know Jenny have a couple.
Yeah.
Somebody in the middle school, and
I was gonna say, my son came home from that, and the first thing he said, so the high school came today. I said, I know your sister was there. And he said, did you know there's 17 AP classes at Milford High School? I said, I had a little familiarity, yeah. He's like, how many can I take? Like, that was what, I was really excited as a parent, but also as a school committee member to say, wow, that was one of the takeaways that an 8th grade student took away from that was, yeah, it was great. In my case, in my house, it was, yeah, his sister was there, and it was great to see all the sports and the athletics and all the other things that we just talked about. But that was one of the takeaways that he had was actually just the sheer number of AP classes and then offering. And his first question was, wow, how many can I take? Can I take them all? Which I think is, I think that's what we're looking for. He was really excited about Milford High and the process of what that looks like. So, Jenna.
No, I have a 6th grader, but I did see that Nancy
we missed you.
posted it on
Okay.
Twitter.
Next year.
But saw the cheerleaders, and you can hear Nancy oohing and eyeing in the background. But it looked great. It's a great model.
Yep. It's 2 years in a row he's come back because he was in 7th grade last year. He's in 8th grade this year. Came back last year with the same thing. All excited.
Great.
So
That's our goal.
And BBT did a presentation as well.
They did.
Right.
They did.
Okay. All right. Good. So that's policy. Actually, that's all the subcommittee updates. Future agenda items. Do we have any future agenda items? Any old business? No old business? All right, we do have an executive session tonight to discuss the MTA grievance. It will not return to regular session. It does require a roll call vote. Jim?
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes.
All right, so we'll be going into executive session and not returning. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion from Scott, seconded by John. All in favor? Thank you.